Hayley, 26, was very slim at a young age. Suddenly she started getting bigger. In 2011, she weighed 69 kilos and her stomach ballooned and it was tender and painful. After that she put on another 20 kilos. In 2016 Hayley had excruciating stomach pains. The ultrasound showed she had an enlarged spleen and also began to lose her hair. Professor John expected to see more abnormality in her blood count if the spleen was indeed very large. He suspected when they're talking about splenomegaly, they're talking here about it's bigger than normal, most of the cause of which would be associated with weight loss, rather than weight gain. Dr. Barbara wanted to know a little bit more about her lifestyle, like diet and some other factors, like stress, anxiety, depression, mental health, which may have led to the weight change. She talked about Cushing's syndrome, which is cortisol excess. This is a stress hormone, but if we make too much of it, it can cause rapid weight gain and a thinning of the hair. Dr. Sharon believes the hair loss or hair thinning. She mentioned telogen effluvium, which is normal when shed more than your baseline number of hairs. There is a long list of telogen effluvium hormone, but if we make too much of it, it can cause rapid weight gain and a thinning of the hair. Dr. Sharon believes the hair loss or hair thinning. She mentioned telogen effluvium, which is normal when shed more than your baseline number of hairs. There is a long list of telogen effluvium. Sent Hayley for a blood test to check her immune system, plus a small organ that helps to filter the blood. He needed to see if the spleen's still being enlarged. If it's enlarged, why is that the case? Hayley's abdomen will have a detailed scan ordered by Professor John. The results will be critical. A reason why it can be enlarged is because of cancer. CT scans, X-rays are taken from different angles. Professor John showed Hayley the liver and spleen that he was interested in just behind the stomach. Professor John says it is not technically large, so no cancer. The organ lymph nodes are normal. Blood clout showed hemoglobin is normal. Lastly, the immune system is normal, so they ruled out a lot of things. Hayley now went to London Bridge Hospital to see Dr. Sharon. The hair follicle from which the hair comes out actually comes from the same layer of cells as your skin cells when we're developing in your mother's womb. Hair loss disorders in general fall under the remit of a dermatologist. Dr. Wong suspects that Hayley's hair loss could point towards an underlying condition. She says sometimes hair disorders can give you a clue as to what else might be going on. A certain area of your scalp, which is sort of crown and a little bit to the sides, is more the dependent area. She noticed the scalp, particularly young patients who have significant thinning in the hormone dependent are and they're way too young to have genetic hair loss. Dr. Sharon noticed that Hayley had acne on the forehead. Hayley sometimes get acne more around the chin. During puberty, you have surges of male hormone in both boys and girls. Surge in testosterone that drives the grease glands into overproduction. Majority of times acne gets less severe, but if goes beyond that, reinforces the ability of uniting hormonal problems. Dr. Sharon, some of the acne spots are quite large and presumably it may be painful. As a teenager she hardly had any acne. Greasy skin and acne in a young female points towards hyperandrogenic state, where you're producing too much male hormones. The test for that will be ordered by an endocrinologist. Dr. Barbara is a leading specialist on hormones and obesity. Hayley needed to go on contraceptive pills really young because it was very heavy and painful. Energy levels were awful. Barbara says that there may be hormonal drivers, a genetic predisposition that makes them eat excessively and gain weight. Barbara noticed Hayley darkening of the skin in the neck area. She also looked under the arm for acanthus nigricans, which is basically darkening normally under the underarms but sometimes around the neck as well, and it's a sign of insulin resistance. She organized a blood test to check her hormones and put it all together. polycystic ovary syndrome is far more common, affecting 1 in 5 women. While an ultrascan should pick up any of the distinctive follicles on the ovaries that can occur in this condition, Dr. Barbara must decide if there is enough evidence for a clear decision either way. The diagnosis was polycystic ovary syndrome. Therefore, Hayley had a combination of clinical symptoms and biochemical symptoms. She had evidence of hyperandrogenemia, which basically means elevated male hormones. She has hair loss, also have acne, weight gain, pelvic. Ultrasound showed, we did visually follicles in keep with polycystic ovarian syndrome. A hormone treatment called spironolactone, which is anti-androgen, to reduce the level of male hormones, is probably driving this hair loss. Lotte 20, she went on holiday with her mum, reported a pain over her left eye and nausea. Within 2 weeks, Lotta was admitted to hospital. Discharged after a week with a likely diagnosis of a migraine. April 2018, she woke up with no sight in her left eye. Dr. Paul says 15 to 20% of women Lotta age will suffer from migraine headaches, but it is not supposed to cause eye and nausea. Within 2 weeks, Lotta was admitted to hospital. Discharged after a week with a likely diagnosis of a migraine. April 2018, she woke up with no sight in her left eye. Dr. Paul says 15 to 20% of women Lotta age will suffer from migraine headaches, but it is not supposed to cause blindness in one eye. Ophthalmologist, review who could find no abnormality with the eye itself. He wonders if there is a problem with the blood supply to the eye. The condition such as vasculitis, where there is inflammation of the blood vessels, which is an autoimmune thing. She had an MRI scan. Began to lose her hair. Professor John expected to see more abnormality in her blood count if the spleen was indeed very large. He suspected when they're talking about splenomegaly, they're talking here about it's bigger than normal, most of the cause of which would be associated with weight loss. Entirely symmetrical meaning normal. Dr. Paul, it's hard to see an immediate connection with the car crash that happened when she was 13, although you can have a condition called dissection of the carotid artery, where there is a tear in the carotid artery from trauma, but that usually causes problems. Really quite acutely and quite immediately. Dr. Marlowe says she is looking at her notes for tick-borne infection. The other thing she was thinking about is whether or not there are other parasites. One thing that can occur in the brain is something called toxoplasmosis, which you can get from cats. So does she have any pets? Because it can cause blindness. Dr. Marlowe will want to see a contrast-enhanced imagery, because you can actually miss quite a lot of these things we're looking for in her previous scans. Lotta went to see infectious disease specialist Dr. Marlowe. The biggest killer in the world are infectious disease according to Dr. Marlowe. Cancer kills 10 million people globally. Infection diseases is about 15 million. This year is the coronavirus. A couple of years ago, it was a Zika virus. She has a huge level of admiration for these organisms, because of their mentioned the vast majority of people who have been bitten by ticks will not know, because they're so small and they will just fall off. Ticks don't always carry infections, but if they do carry an infection, they can pass disease on after having a blood meal. One of those is Lyme disease, which is caused by a pathogen called Borrelia, which is a spirochete-type bacteria. First symptoms that may present is a flu-like illness. It can also go on to give you joint pains, numbness and tingling in your hands. In Lotta's case it will have an effect on the brain. Toxoplasmosis was also mentioned, which is due to a test for this by taking a sample of Lotta's cerebral spinal fluid. The surgery Lotta had after her car accident means that's not possible, but she can have a blood test. Marlowe looked at Lotta liver functions, kidney functions and that all fine. She also looked at a variety of different viruses and that was normal. She doesn't have toxoplasma. Lyme disease, also other infections that can spread. Ticks came back negative. The next step was to refer Lotta to a neurologist in London named Paul. Dr. Paul says the brain is a complex object. It is something like 85 billion neurons, each of which may have looped connections. In neurology, the brain can go wrong in different ways. Dr. Paul will now do his own sets of tests. Lotta told Dr. Paul that her back pain was 4 years ago. In the end, she has to get spinal surgery. 11 months later, her headache started. Paul examined Lotta's eye for different tests. She could not see anything in her right eye when Paul was taking the test. Lotta was sent for a test to check her optic nerves. As she watches the screen, messages should travel from her eye to her brain. By recording her neutral activity, Dr. Paul can find where the messages from her bad eye are getting through as they should. Dr. Paul has also requested a special MRI scan to check for damage to the brain or the optic nerve. Lotta is injected with a harmless dye called gadolinium, which circulates around the brain, allowing high-contrast images to be produced. The scans will reveal any problems around the optic nerves, also looking for clues to explain Lotta headache. If you're controlling severe headache with medication, you need to start considering the possibility there are some other causes of chronic headache. For example, if you have a leak of spinal fluid, that will reveal any problems around the optic nerves, also looking for clues to explain Lotta headache. If you're controlling severe headache with medication, you need to start considering the possibility there are some other causes of chronic headache. For example, if you have a leak of spinal fluid, that to be addressed. Paul MRI scan test shows the brain looks healthy, optic nerve is normal. Paul says the diagnosis is that she has solved the cause of chronic form of migraine. It can improve it with the right kind of treatment. The problem with the eye showed that she had functional visual loss to be addressed. Paul MRI scan test shows the brain looks healthy, optic nerve is normal. Paul says the diagnosis is that she has solved the cause of chronic form of migraine. It can improve it with the right kind of treatment. The problem with the eye showed that she had functional visual loss is that hardware of the brain, a bit like a computer, the wiring, the hardware are all functioning okay, but it's, if you like, the software programs are not running correctly. So it's thought that the response of the brain to difficult thought or feeling, sometime to some difficult experience in there past, like the back pain she had a few years ago. Lotta will see a psychologist to get her feeling and overcome her problems. Like, share, comment and subscribe.